3, 2.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome once again to the weekly media briefing and public health update with Montgomery County Executive Marc Elrich. I'm Lorna Virgilio, Hispanic Public Information Officer, and joining us today is Dr. Nina Ashworth, Chief of Public Health Services for Montgomery County Government, as well as Dr. Earl Stoddard, who is Assistant Chief Administrative Officer. We have a special guest today as well, Secretary Jake Day, who is the Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development. Once again, Secretary for the state of Maryland. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Mr. County Executive, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, and today is an amazingly beautiful day outside. I hope it stays this way. I want to spend some time talking today about something that's been on the minds of more and more people across Maryland, actually across the country, and that's the problem of finding an affordable place to live. A poll conducted by the University of Maryland and the Washington Post determined that affordable housing is among registered voters one of the top 2 concerns when questioned just a month ago. And nearly 20% of those polled called it their top concern, trailing only crime in that ranking and ahead of public education, taxes, and jobs. Since 2019, Montgomery County has produced more than 1,300 affordable units, even through the pandemic. And another 1,850 have been preserved. In the current fiscal year, FY24, of all the units that we've funded or committed funding to through production and preservation, we've generated 69.5% of the units being affordable, and that's a significant number. We've preserved a higher percentage of existing affordable units because production is so expensive. The units we produce are about 33% have been affordable. But those 2 numbers together are really significant. We're also prioritizing protecting naturally occurring affordable housing. For years, more affordable units were lost to new development than replaced. Between new development and rising rents, between situations where the planning board has approved taking down existing affordable housing and replacing it with unaffordable housing and fewer affordable units that would be available even after larger new developments were approved, all that's continued to contribute to the loss of affordable housing. The county started with around 42,000 naturally occurring affordable units in 2000. A naturally occurring unit means that it exists not because of any government program, but that's just where the rents were. But today we have fewer than 22,000 of those units remaining, and we're actually projected to lose another 10,000 of those units by 2030. So we're determined to try to stop that trend. And today we're working with community partners in new ways to ensure that that doesn't happen. I don't want to be in the position where there are only 10,000 units on the market that are affordable unless they're constrained by some government program. That would be extraordinarily difficult for us to make up. Today, we're working with community partners in new ways to help ensure it doesn't happen. And last month, we celebrated changes to our right of first refusal law, making it easier to work with community partners who help keep long-term tenants from being priced out of their homes. Looking back over the past several years, the right of first refusal was an option in hundreds of transactions, but only exercised in a handful of times. That's because holding properties was extremely expensive. When you exercise the right of first refusal, we had to put a lot of money on the table in the beginning of the process, and the county just didn't have that kind of money to exercise widely. The new law eliminates the cost involved in holding the property, which will help us protect more naturally occurring affordable housing. It also eases the transition between the county buying a property and then transferring it to a nonprofit developer, because it takes the second settlement out of the transaction, which can save millions of dollars as well. Last year, I signed a rent stabilization bill into law that provides renters legal protections against rent gouging in response to a sharp rise in rent hikes. It will also provide a comfortable margin for property owners to keep up with maintenance and make needed repairs to get a return on their investment. It's another tool we're using to keep and grow affordable housing in our area. Montgomery County's invested record funds to create affordable housing over my first 5 years as county executive. And with my FY25 operating budget, I expect that record investment to continue. I've proposed a record $169 million earmarked for affordable housing, including $65 million in new funds. I want to thank Governor Westmore and other state leaders for prioritizing affordable housing in this year's legislative session. I appreciate the cooperation and partnership of the executive and legislative branches, but there's still more work to do. And at this point, I'd like to welcome Maryland Secretary of Housing, Jake Day, to talk more about the progress made this session and how it helps to make Maryland a better place for everyone. So thank you for being here.
Mr. Executive, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you, and wish we were sitting outside in the park in Montgomery County enjoying this day together.
That would be nice.
But as you have indicated with your remarks, housing affordability is one of the biggest issues that Maryland families are facing right now. It's on their minds, and it's affecting every family decision and up and down the income spectrum. More than half of Maryland renters, about 52%, are cost burdened, paying almost a third of their wages on housing related costs. And the governor's housing package that is now heading to his desk for signature was intended to respond to that need, and is the most comprehensive housing package that a Maryland governor has proposed, and one that we feel really good about. Now, you are right. The work is not done. We at local and state levels have work to do still, but we're very proud about this package, and I want to talk a little bit about it. So I want to thank all of our local partners, yourself included, and members of Montgomery County Council who helped advocate to members of the General Assembly. I want to thank the members of the General Assembly. We have taken strides this session toward addressing the shortage of 96,000 housing units that our state is facing. So this critical legislation has been the result of a lot of collaboration and conversation, a lot of negotiation and discussion, and Marylanders strongly supported it. You talked a little bit about some of the polling that we've seen. The data shows that Marylanders need the state to participate, to be at the table, to address housing affordability. Not every jurisdiction is leading on this issue. There is a non-uniform landscape, and it's our responsibility to ensure that in all 24 jurisdictions of the state that we are addressing housing affordability. So we listened and we acted. Taken together, the three pieces of legislation provide a comprehensive and a collaborative reboot to our housing landscape by spurring new housing construction, cutting burdensome red tape, enhancing long-term financial investment in low-income areas, centralizing resources for Maryland renters, and getting our economy moving again. This session is a turning point to reducing the housing shortage and increasing affordability. I want to note that I did seek to be the housing secretary, but I never sought to be the housing mayor. I did that work in my community because I cared about the impacts on my residents when I was in local government. And I don't know that you care to be the housing county executive, but by doing the work, you're affecting every other facet of their lives. We know that housing influences so much of what any given Maryland family faces in a day, and their decisions about their budget, their decisions about prioritizing their health and their children's health and their education, their children's education. So Maryland's shortage of housing is affecting every single family, and it requires us to act. And we have three components to the legislative package that the governor advocated for. Fundamentally, the first component we call the Housing Expansion and Affordability Act. It reduces or removes artificial regulatory obstacles to producing more housing, the kind of red tape that is, as the comptroller said, holding Maryland's economy back. Maryland has a long history of adopting statewide policy to restrict housing where we shouldn't build it. But until today, we failed to finish the job by incentivizing building housing where we should. The second component of the housing package is the Housing and Community Development Financing Act. And this enhances long-term financial investment in low-income areas. At its core, the bill establishes something called the Maryland Community Investment Corporation. This is a community development entity aimed at leveraging federal new markets tax credits to revitalize and strengthen communities throughout the state. These tax credits, product of U.S. Treasury, have been instrumental in funding various real estate and business development projects in low-income communities in every jurisdiction in the state. And with a $5 billion allocation annually to these tax credits and a $50 million average award per project, it's critical that Maryland get its fair share, and we haven't. We haven't. So we want to take full advantage of this opportunity to spur economic growth. This bill also enhances the use of our statewide Strategic Demolition Fund and Project CORE, its Baltimore City counterpart, to transform community liabilities into assets. And we'll be working with your jurisdictions to increase the effectiveness of that tool. The final component of the housing package, in a nutshell, increases housing security in Maryland and bolsters protections for our vulnerable renters. The Renters' Rights Stabilization Act is a full-scale, ground-up approach that protects the most vulnerable: unsheltered homeless, tenants subject to a turbulent rental system, and those who have lacked opportunity to build generational wealth. This bill addresses high eviction filing rates by increasing the eviction filing fee and also banning the pass-through of those costs to renters. It establishes a new Office of Tenant and Landlord Affairs. It will design and disseminate a statewide Tenants' Bill of Rights as an addendum to leases. It reduces barriers to becoming a renter, and it creates new pathways to homeownership. Does that by creating a statewide, the first in the nation statewide, right of first refusal. And it also reduces the maximum amount of a security deposit to 1 month's rent. It will take time for the housing supply to meet demand, but Marylanders need help now. And that's what the Renters' Rights Stabilization Act is, something that I'm particularly proud of, is all about. The governor's made this session a pivotal year. I've seen it called this session called a number of things: the year of this, the year of that. Let's call next year the housing year, right? We're just setting up the successes of the future. But I do think, again, this is a turning point. And I want to thank you again for your partnership and for your team's partnership in this effort.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
So
Go
I
ahead.
actually did want to kind of be the housing, but it's not just housing. I mean, it's housing, it's wages. I mean, if we don't support the lower economic strata in our society, all the problems that bubble out of that affect everybody in the community. So whether it's housing or incomes or access to healthcare, those are all things that we can act on and make a difference, and know that it's not just going to benefit, folks at the bottom, but it's going to benefit all the rest of us. I mean, everything we have to subsidize and, the kind of programs we have to do to remediate a healthier economy and better jobs and all those things, I think will really make a difference. And people, having to struggle to put, bread on the table and pay rent. I was a former school teacher, and until you've seen elementary kids come to school hungry because their parents are making choices between rent and food, you don't really understand what an impact this has. It's not just a hungry kid. It's a kid who's going to struggle to learn because it's hard to focus on learning when you're hungry. So the stuff you guys did is landmark, for the state. I'm glad that a lot of the stuff we're already doing, that people have had the foresight here to get a little bit ahead of this. And hopefully there's more to come. I look forward to implementation. I look forward to healthier financial times when everybody's able to put more money into this. You all dealt with a pretty surprisingly difficult fiscal issue this year, and it would be good to get ourselves into track with being able to do more of the things we want to do. So I do appreciate your leadership up there. I look forward to talking to you and finding a sunny day to go have lunch outside. Today was a beautiful day. And I guess we'll be talking soon. So I
Thank
guess
you,
you
Mr.
want to
Crown.
ask for questions?
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. Members of the media, if you have any questions for the county executive and or Secretary Day regarding affordable housing, please raise your hand. This is your time to ask those questions. No questions regarding affordable housing? No questions for the secretary? Going once? Twice? I guess we don't have any questions regarding affordable housing. Thank you, Secretary Day, for joining us today, Mr. County Executive. You can remain on the call or you can go if you need to go. Mr.
Thank
County
you, Mr.
Executive.
Executive, and thank you, Lorna.
Yeah, thank you. I'm
Thank
sure
you.
you have work to do.
Appreciate you all very much.
The feeling's mutual. So we're going to talk a little bit about the budget. This week, the public is testifying before the council on my recommended FY25 operating budget. About 150 people signed up to offer their thoughts on the budget, and the final hearing, virtual, is this afternoon. A lot of people testified in support of the programs that are in that budget. The budget is a long way from the first one I dealt with. I was part of building budgets in my 12 years on the county council, and this is my 6th budget as county executive. When I took office in December of 18, by the time we got around to actually getting the budget ready, we were facing a $90 million deficit in that first year. And that meant we had to make cuts in what was left of 2019 between January and June, and that the lack of revenues trickled over into projections for the following year. So what we thought was going to be a very healthy year in 2019 turned out to be constrained by the loss of revenues that had begun in 2019. And to make matters worse, our reserves back then were below the 10% target that the counties had, and which I will point out, the county had never achieved up to that point. Well, here we are 6 years later, and we're ending the current fiscal year with 15% in reserves. That's 5% over what's required in reserve, which was over $300 million above the reserve level that was required. And we did this by being very careful with our spending and not looking at every time dollars came in as this is an opportunity in the middle of the year to add additional expenses. Everybody does that sometime, but we were able to restrain ourselves and make sure we brought as much money forward at the end of the year as possible. We're using some of those reserves this year to fund critically important programs and services and helping the hungry and the homeless, fighting climate change, improving transit, making investments in affordable housing, making investments in economic development, and improving education. Even with what we're spending this year, we will end the fiscal year, which would be next June, with about 11.6% in reserves, still 1.6% above the target of 10%. We'll use some of the surplus above the 10% target to support one-time spending, and some of it's actually going to recurring spending. And generally, we try to avoid recurring spending. But there are two reasons we're doing this. One of it is driven by the council decision last year on the education budget. Instead of passing the recommended taxes that we put on the table, at least another 2 cents of the taxes, the council instructed the school system to use their remaining federal money to hire the people they intended to hire. That left them with about $33 million of expenses that they made that had no tax support. And so, of course, since they weren't firing the people they hired last year, that $33 million landed in this budget with no tax support to cover it. So we are partly making up for the 33 million. We also made some changes in the school budget request that we felt were important to try to whittle that number down a little bit, which we were able to do. We're also spending some of this money to pay for ongoing expenses. And this is an example of an ongoing expense because those teachers are going to have to get paid, and the psychologists and the staff they hired, I have to be paid every year. And so that's going to be an ongoing expense for this. We also recognize that without this budget and without revenues to support it, the school systems would have had to deal with a cut in services. That's the problem we're dealing with. There are other needs, and we have to remember that the last 2 years saw dramatic decreases in transfer and recordation taxes. And they're expected to recover quickly once the feds end their current fiscal policies that is strangling the housing market by driving up the cost of borrowing, which is affecting both builders and buyers. So while our revenues were down about 75 million in this area, we're expecting that those revenues do come back next year. So we don't look at this problem as an ongoing problem. We know that we, had a long history of pretty healthy recordation and transfer taxes, and we know how much this has affected that. So we're pretty confident that we're going to see a recovery next year. And so we're not really worried about this, the concerns about a deficit streaming from this. A memo from the council president to the council asserts there's a $115 million hole when there's not a $115 million hole. We have more reserves than we require, and we continue to earn AAA bond ratings, small 3 bond rating agencies with positive comments, and no suggestion from the agencies that we raise the level of our bonding. Our reserves exceed those of the state and some of the other local AAA jurisdictions in the state. So there's no reason to believe that our reserve levels are truly inadequate. And we know that we're pretty confident that we're in a healthy place, and that there's just been this insistence that we're going to have a problem when we don't have a problem. And it's the same insistence that we've dealt with for the last 5 years. I mean, when we were doing COVID, council staff said we were going to have a $460 million deficit or something like that. I will point out to everybody that never happened. Last year, they said we were going to have a $145 million deficit. That didn't happen. So we think we've been doing pretty good and holding things in a steady place. And we think we have a good sense of, what we're going to be able to do in the future. So we're a little bit less worried about the assumptions that the council staff has made. Another criticism of this budget is asking for too much, both fair compensation for our employees and services to our community. And I just want to start by saying this juxtaposition of these two things is a little, I think, disingenuous. As the community continues to ask for more services, more maintenance of roads, more planting of trees, more removing dead trees, programs for the LGBTQ community, for health centers that actually address their needs, programs for more housing, staffing for the rent stabilization office, and other things we're doing. Climate change, where we're making additions to our staff to address climate change, which is something the council's embraced, that the county has to hit these goals. You don't hit goals if you don't have people doing the work to get you there. And juxtaposing services to whether or not our employees get compensated properly is just, it's really troubling. The idea that if the council wants to expand services, that somehow county employees should take wage cuts or should get wage increases below inflation is, I think, way off the mark. They didn't cause the problem. Why should they be punished because we're trying to, provide deeper services in the community? And this budget doesn't even require a tax increase. So there's a chart that got planted in the staff packet, and of the 116 million, the only part related to this year's recommended pay and benefit adjustments, which were actually approved by the council last year, is $43 million. 28 million is the annualization of the benefits and the pay because it was scheduled not to be full year. There are pension enhancements, which the council voted for. There are other retiree costs, which are unavoidable. There's active employee group insurance costs, and group insurance has gone up. That's not avoidable. We have $10 million in net new positions, many of those for positions that the council wanted and are attached to programs that the council supports. We had a reduction in 7 million in our group insurance costs for retirees, and we had $7 million in other increases for personnel costs, which include overtime, holiday pay, promotions, and other miscellaneous costs. So of the 116 million, you've got 43 million attributable to the contracts for this year. and the other is from previous years or unavoidable costs. And so to represent this as all the costs of compensation, as if this is something we willingly walked into and could have avoided, is just not true. We couldn't have avoided the retiree group insurance costs. We couldn't have avoided the active employee group insurance or the other retirement costs or the pension enhancements. So it's not correct to label these the way they got labeled. This chart details expected additions for compensation in 25, and we agree with that. This is what we all agreed to last year when the council approved the contracts. These additions in salaries are also necessary to stay competitive in this region. We've heard lots of, the number of members of the council have raised issues over filling vacancies. Well, one of the things that have bedeviled us in filling vacancies is the differential between what people can get for working in Montgomery County and what they can get outside. And we can bring you department heads who will talk about extending contracts to people and then having people say, I'm not taking the contract because it's too low, even after having gone through the interview process and being selected. So wages are a problem. They're not just a problem for Montgomery County, they're a problem for every other government around us, including the federal government, and they're a problem in the private sector. So wages are going up. It's not a bad thing that wages are going up, because the truth is all that money gets spent back in our communities, which actually helps support the business community. So this is not a totally negative thing, but it's also something that the county can't avoid. If our pay doesn't attract the employees we need, then we're not going to deliver the services our residents need and want. And many of these new positions reflect needs that were derived from council priorities and legislation. Council knows that to attract top talent, we have to be close to what the private sector's offering. We don't have to be at the top, but we've got to be close. There are many benefits to working for the county government, we believe, but we can't be so far off that we're not able to attract people to work here. And if we break these labor agreements now, you break the trust that's not going to be easily repaired. So I'm not sure where the council or the staff thinks they ought to go with their comments, but it would be kind of troubling if they decide to walk down that road. This is a physically sound, good budget with no tax increases and strong reserves that continue to exceed our targets. After 10 community meetings in preparation for this budget and months of work with each department on the tough choices that have to be made, our surpluses remain robust, even with target investments in services and after meeting our compensation obligations. This proposal meets all of our needs, addresses our area's biggest concerns in schools, public safety, and affordable housing, and climate change, and it does so without raising the tax rate. And I urge you to look it over right now with our interactive budget tool at the Montgomery County MD.gov budget. Finally, the Maryland General Assembly ends its session, and now that the 2024 session is over, I wanted to extend my gratitude to Montgomery County House and Senate delegations for their dedication and support of many of the priorities of the county government and for the 1.1 million residents we serve. Throughout this session, the General Assembly navigated complex issues, debated important legislation, worked collaboratively to find solutions that would benefit our communities. And they've begun the work on dealing really with their long-term budget shortfalls, the inability to raise the money that many of them feel they need to raise has been an ongoing issue, and particularly in transportation. And I think all of us are hoping, at the state level, there's a broader recovery of revenues so they can do some of the things that they weren't able to quite reach to this year. We also hope that they'll look at the legislation that was recommended by the Maryland Association of Counties to allow local governments to use differential rates and to more creatively use our special taxing districts. So we have the ability to raise taxes the way they have in Virginia, primarily on commercial property, without dinging residential property. We know that we've got a model next door. I keep telling people, if you like Virginia and you think they're doing an amazing job of attracting businesses, look at the investments they're making. I talked to one of their economic development leaders, And I asked them what they were doing, what Fairfax was doing in terms of what incentives they provide. They said the state provides incentives. Fairfax isn't doing cash incentives, but they're providing infrastructure. That's the operative word here, infrastructure. People want to come to a place that's able to provide the necessary infrastructure. Our tax system right now very much prevents us from doing that. And I'll give you an easy example. I think everybody would understand. We've been locked into spending $280 million a year on bonds for more than 5 years now. If you know anything about inflation, inflation would have reduced the value of $280 million to 240 million or less over over the previous 5 years. So in effect, we're spending less and less on construction and on bonds to fund construction, which is impacting our ability to build the schools that the county needs. We're not able to keep to the schedule that the school system has. We've tried to make some changes in it, but the reality is if their prices go up and our bonds stay steady, it's a no-win battle for the county and it's a no-win battle for the students. So I urge the council to take a look at their bonding assumptions and to restore some more bonding capacity to reflect the increased cost of all these projects. When I was on the council, we peaked at $340,000 a year. So if you compare the two, we were 60,000 a year over what we're spending now, which would have amounted to over the 6-year capital budget, $360 million that would be available for projects that we're not able to fund right now. So there's a reason to rethink some of this stuff, and I hope we do. There was plenty of progress made in this session, though, and I'm pleased that we continue to see state support for bus rapid transit. The Train Commission will be considering the creation of the regional transportation authorities and local enabling legislation to expand financing options to help provide much needed infrastructure funding. We're receiving $500,000 in state capital funds for our life sciences biohub, critical component of our life sciences industry. And I want to thank the state for $6 million in operating costs and $3 million for the University of Maryland Institute of Health Computing, a game-changing project in a partnership between the county and the University of Maryland at the North Bethesda Metro Station. The University of Maryland Institute for Health Computing is the future of healthcare and innovation. We've received attention to this project already from businesses and academic institutions around the globe. I just got out of a meeting literally an hour ago with a project that's interested in coming to Montgomery County and helping grow the AI, our AI businesses here. And we're very interested in this, and they're interested in working with the Institute for Health Computing because the AI is available kind of for all. And this project's a catalyst for growing our economy and creating jobs. The state's commitment to this project will help the University of Maryland and Montgomery County continuing to develop private sector interest and invest in our Pike District. And the Pike District is really important. Many people think of it as Westfield Mall, White Flint Mall, which is no longer there, and the developments on the west side of Wisconsin Avenue. But this, if you think about it, is the largest accumulation of either empty land or lightly built commercial property, one-story strip malls in the county. The Lerner property of over 40 acres is empty, and we've got all this property in both the car dealership and in many of these small strip centers that could easily be redeveloped and help us build a biotech center there that a lot of us are looking and hoping that we can catalyze with the Institute for Health Computing. So we have pretty ambitious ideas about what's possible. And we appreciate the state's commitment to our project because their commitment is going to help make all this possible. I was happy to see the state provided the way for all Marylanders, regardless of their immigration status, to be able to buy health insurance on the state's health exchange, as well as to ensure that schools around the state have safeguards regarding protecting books from being banned without a proper process and oversight. Lastly, I was very pleased the legislature passed several affordable housing bills and thoughtfully addressed rising concerns about juveniles committing violent crimes and dangerous and reckless driving. We didn't get everything we wanted there, but we'll go back next year and try to get the pieces that we didn't get this year. States also followed Montgomery County's lead and passed a bill to grant funding program for reproductive health clinics to bolster security at their facilities. It also bolsters community safety by passing the Melanie Diaz Act, which will establish new requirements of landlords to share key fire safety information with tenants. Although there's still a lot of work still to be done, I'm confident that with our leadership and representation in Annapolis, we'll continue to build a brighter future for our Maryland County residents and our fellow Marylanders across the state. So now I'd like to give my health team a chance to offer any updates before we open it up to questions.
Thank you, Mr. County Executive. Dr. Ashford or Dr. Stoddard, do you have any remarks?
No updates from the public health perspective. Thank you.
Yeah, for me, I just want to highlight, I know the Montgomery County Police Department did a press conference earlier today talking about two hit and run incidents we had over the weekend, including a fatality. They're looking for information about the vehicles that were involved, and have asked that members of the public who have any information about their white Acuras in both cases are asked to call the CRU unit at 240-773-6620 or CRUNIT@montgomerycountymd.gov if you have information about the white Acuras that are sought in both of those. That they don't believe necessarily that's the same case. They don't have any reason to believe that same vehicle, but two white Acuras are being sought. One of them definitely has frontal damage that would be distinguishable for example, a car repair shop. So please do want to get information. Obviously, roadway safety is incredibly important to us here in Montgomery County, and including the county executive. And these kinds of situations, we want to make sure that justice is served for the individuals who are involved in these deadly incidents, particularly when they flee the scene, which certainly says something about the risk they pose to the public. So, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Stoddard. Members of the media, we're going to open it up right now for questions. Please raise your hand if you have any questions for the county official this afternoon. Any questions? No questions today? Going once? Twice? I guess not. Thank you,
right.
everybody. Thank you for joining us. Stay safe. We'll see you next time.
Bye.